So we're going to continue in our I'm In series. And if you're doing the readings on this through the Bible, you've read some things in Genesis that are just crazy, right? Because we're going from the beginning to the end of the Bible looking for what does it mean to devote ourselves to God, to be all in, to not just say, all right, I'll do it, but to want to do it. And you've read some things in Genesis that are just crazy, right? I don't know any other way to describe it, but just that, really? You kind of scratch your head and go, whoa, what was that? You read any of that lately? I did. I know you did. Think of what Jacob's life was like. Jacob is a very important individual in Jewish history and actually has a lot of application for us as well. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, father of the faith, right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. That's how the Jewish people would identify whose God they serve, because there are all these pagan gods. So we serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. So Jacob's an important dude. And in fact, his name, he has a second name, is Israel. It's where we get the term Israelite. So Jacob's important, but Jacob's family was crazy. Jacob's experience was crazy. So I want to talk about this one event, and I'll talk about other aspects of his life, talking about this one event. But there's this one night that Jacob just has this encounter that you just kind of scratch your head and go, what, God, is that all about? So I want to talk about this one night. Now, he is alone at the beginning of this night. And that actually is significant because Jacob, I'm going to guess, was not alone very often. And I say that because Jacob has 2 wives and 11 children. And in fact, those 11 children are all boys. So it's possible, because back then they didn't always record the girls. There's other girls involved, so it's a huge family. This is a massive family. Those 11 boys, by the way, are not from 2 women, but from 4 women. Because the 2 women got into this let's make baby contest so that we can get Jacob's affection and be the better wives. They're fighting with each other. And they get their maidservants involved and have them sleep with Jacob when they can't actually produce any more babies. This is one crazy family. Now, this is all before the law, okay? So Moses hasn't shown up, given the 10 Commandments. God's will has not been clearly defined. I think there's an aspect of this, though, that even if you didn't have the law, that you ought to say, wait, something's not right with this. But nonetheless, they don't know a whole lot of right from wrong at this point. So we'll give them a little bit of a pass here, but still, this is one big crazy family. On this particular night, Jacob sends them all away. None of them are with him. He sends them away. He sends even all his possessions. He sends everything away so that he is all alone, because there's some kind of decision he needs to wrestle through. He's got something on his mind he needs to spend some time working through. Now, I don't know, maybe you've had a night like that where you can't sleep, and during the day you've been able to keep busy, but there's just something on your mind at night. When the house is quiet, your mind is just active. It's noisy, and you don't know you don't know what to do, and you wrestle through that all night long. Okay, so I think that's kind of what's going on here. Jacob has something going on where he's wrestling through it in his mind, but at the same time, that same night, this wrestling match becomes a literal, real, physical wrestling match. And I want to talk about both. I want to talk about what he's wrestling with in his mind. I want to talk about what he's actually wrestling with for real. Because I think the wrestling match is just kind of crazy. It's weird. And I know we've already talked about crazy. His family's crazy. Everything about him's crazy. But this is just one weird night. So let me just share with you what happens, and then we'll talk about what's going on in his head and what this real wrestling match is all about. So here's how it begins. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives and his 2 maidservants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford, the low place of the Jabbok River. So they're crossing the river. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So everything is gone. Servants, that means, also went and took all his cattle, all his belongings. So Jacob was left alone. But his me time, all alone time, wrestling with his thoughts, doesn't last very long. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. I love how matter-of-fact this is. It's like, so this man, we're not told who he is right here. We don't even know who he is. This man just starts wrestling with him all night long. So he's got this mental wrestling match, and he's got a physical wrestling match going on. And it's crazy, but it gets crazier. Because when the man, that's the stranger, saw that he could not overpower him, Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. So no beating him with a stick or body blow. It's just a touch, and he's crippled. It's crazy. And yet Jacob holds on to this man. So let's just stop right there, and let's just kind of back up and ask the question, okay, what was Jacob wrestling with in his mind before he literally wrestled with this stranger, with this other individual? So here's what's going on. Jacob, 20 years earlier, left home, and he didn't leave home on good conditions. And he's been gone for 20 years, and now he's coming back. He's coming back home. And usually coming back home is a cause for celebration, but you know, if you've ever hurt somebody, if you've messed up, memories can be long, right? And forgiveness doesn't come easy. And so Jacob is now heading home. What he did 20 years ago is he stole his brother's blessing, the blessing that his father was supposed to give the firstborn. Now, his brother is a twin of his. Esau is Jacob's brother. He is the firstborn, meaning he came out of the womb first. Jacob followed right after. They're twins, but because Esau was born first, he's the one that's supposed to get the blessing. Jacob, though, decided, he and his mom actually conspired, I'm telling you, this is a messed up family, against their father to steal the blessing. And he dresses up in his brother's clothes, Esau's clothes. He actually puts animal skin on his arms so that he feels hairy, and on his neck so he feels hairy because Esau was a hairy man. And he goes in and he lies to his daddy and says, I'm Esau. And Jacob, who's really old and blind, can't see very well, and smells the clothes of his son Esau, feels the hair, and says, even though your voice sounds like Jacob, I guess you are Esau, and he gives him the blessing. And the blessing doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, but back then it was like a prophetic calling on his life. And the firstborn's supposed to get that. And so it's a huge deal, it's a big deal. Esau is so upset with him that Esau vows as soon as Dad passes away, and Dad was old, he was going to pass away soon, I'm going to kill my brother. And so Jacob leaves. He flees the country. He goes all the way up to the north territory, country where his uncle Laban lives, and he lives with him for 20 years up there. What happens during those 20 years before he's coming back? So he's coming back to try to make amends with his brother, but before he comes back, for 20 years while he's gone, it's not like, those 20 years just passed quickly, nothing really important happened. There's all kinds of stuff that happened. In fact, it's crazy, and I'll just summarize it just like this. So Jacob falls in love with Laban's youngest daughter. His uncle Laban's youngest daughter wants to marry her, spends 7 years working to provide enough of a dowry to have her hand. And on the night that he is to consummate the marriage, Laban doesn't like the fact that his younger daughter's getting married before his older daughter, so he tricks Jacob into sleeping with the older daughter. Crazy runs in this family. And so Jacob wakes up, what? I'm kind of wondering how he didn't know, but whatever. So, maybe the veil's on all night. I don't know. So Jacob then is like beside himself, I got the wrong girl. And so Laban says, it wasn't right, and so I did this, and tries to justify himself. And he then says, all right, so you work another 7 years for me. You just promised me right here, right now, you work another 7 years, and I'll give you my other daughter. So he actually marries sisters. So not only does he have two women, he has two sisters who don't particularly like each other and going at each other. This is what's going on. This is what went on for 20 years. And then he works another 4 years, so a total of 20 years. And he comes back, another 6 years, and he comes all the way back with all this stuff, all these possessions, all of these children, all of these women. He comes back, and he stops about halfway from the northern territory where Uncle Laban was, and south where his brother Esau is. He stops about halfway, camps out for a few days there, sends servants on ahead of him to tell his brother that he's coming back and he wants to make amends, he wants to reconcile, and he waits for a response. A few days later, the servants return with bad news. Your brother Esau is on his way, and he's on his way with 400 men. Now, nobody travels with 400 men unless they want to make war. And so Jacob is beside himself. He can't understand this. He can't believe this. And this is enough to keep you awake at night. This is enough to wrestle through, right? So he is trying to actually figure out how he's going to get out of this mess. And what he's doing by sending everybody away is not just giving him time to think about this, but he's preparing for his escape. If he can get them out of there, he actually splits up his family into two separate groups so that just in case one group gets overtaken by his brother, that maybe their life, the other group would be spared. He's just trying to figure out how he's going to get out of this. And I imagine he's wrestling through the decision whether he stays or goes. Am I going to wait here? Am I going to run? And he's wrestling through this decision when a real wrestling match shows up. I mean, the real one, right? Just shows up. And so you might ask the question, all right, so why doesn't Jacob just go back north up to Uncle Laban's country and live there? I mean, he lived there for 20 years, and besides, Laban doesn't have any more daughters, so he can't accidentally marry another one. Why doesn't he just go back? And the answer is because Jacob greatly offended Uncle Laban as well. And Uncle Laban actually put together some men, and he was hunting down Jacob. This happened before Esau arrives. He's being chased by Laban and his men. And if God hadn't intervened and said, no, you don't touch Jacob's life, Uncle Laban might have killed Jacob before brother Esau ever had a chance. Have you ever been there where the whole family's like against you? Like, it doesn't matter what you seem to do, and it may not be the same situation, but everybody seems to be just against you. Let me ask you a question. If that's true, that you keep finding yourself in these situations, could you be the problem? Right? Isn't that fair? Could it be you? You always have to look for the common denominator. And so here Jacob is struggling to figure out what to do. A real wrestling match shows up, and you almost have to ask the question, well, is this Jacob fighting Jacob? Doesn't it kind of seem like that? Like Jacob is the one who is always fighting for something. Did you know that when he came into the world, I told you that they're twins and they were born just about at the same time. One came, then the other came. But as Esau was coming out first, they noticed that attached to Esau's heel was the hand of Jacob as he was coming out. He was grabbing a hold of the heel. And in fact, they gave him the name, because names are significant back then more so than now. Right now we look up the 10,000 baby names and find one, and we kind of think it's amusing that what the name means, but we don't put a lot into it. They put a huge amount into it. And they called this second child Jacob because Jacob means heel grabber. Can you imagine being called heel grabber? That is a euphemism for deceiver. Jacob is named deceiver. And that's exactly what he does all his life. He wrestles to get what he wants. He wrestles for his for a birthright that wasn't his. He wrestled to have the blessing from dad. He wrestled to get the girl. He wrestled for enormous cattle. He's always fighting for something. And so it seems like, oh, this is obvious. Jacob is fighting himself. You ever find yourself fighting you? You ever find yourself wrestling with you as the biggest obstacle and biggest problem, and you know this is true if you've ever said to yourself, why did I do that again? Right? I promised I wouldn't do that anymore. Sometimes it's you, right? Sometimes it's me. And yet, this isn't Jacob like in a vision. It can't be. It's someone real that is standing before him, that he's literally wrestling with. I don't know why the Bible doesn't just say fights with, but I think maybe because he's wrestling with these thoughts and ideas. Because when I think of wrestling, I think of the Greco-Roman wrestling style, and the half Nelsons and the 2-point takedowns. But no, what's going on here is a fight between two what seems to be grown men. In fact, there's damage done. A hip is thrown out. He's wrenched. He's crippled. This is real. So it can't be Jacob. Who is it then? In order to answer that, I want to take us back to the beginning of this chapter we're in. Because there's something that happens that I think is a big clue as to what is going on this weird night. Now, this is something that happens, and Jacob takes notice of it, and it's actually not a big surprise to Jacob that when he sends everybody away and he's alone, he's not really alone. This doesn't totally surprise him. I mean, it surprises us when we read the text. We're like, there's a man that showed up. What? Where'd this guy come from? But to Jacob, he probably made some assumptions based on what he saw earlier. And so we need to go back there. Sometimes we just kind of skip over this. We kind of scratch our head. What was that? And then we go on. Is that significant? Well, it actually is significant. Here's what happens. Remember I said that Jacob is traveling from the north, from his uncle Laban's, down south towards his brother Esau. And he's caught in between, in a sense, because he's promised Laban that he wouldn't go back. And he's scared because Jacob's coming up. Esau's coming up with his 400 men. So he camps out here. But why does he camp out here? It's not a town, it's not a village, it's not anything significant. Why does he camp out here? He camps out here because of something he saw in this spot, in between his uncle and his brother. This is what he saw. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. Again, I love how matter-of-fact that is. Angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is the camp of God. Because he sees angels of God here. And angels, by the way, aren't the little babies with the little bows and arrows and little wings, and they're so cute. Every time an encounter with angels shows up in the Bible, there is tremendous fear and respect, and these guys are powerful and big, and so he sees mighty angels show up. He says, this is the camp of God, so he named that place Mahanaim, and he wants this to be the place that he stays. And who wouldn't want to stay here if there are mighty angels here, when you just know you almost lost your life to your uncle because of the mistake you just made, and you're about to lose your life because your brother's coming with 400 men, and yet there's angels here. This is a good place to stay. In fact, I think this gives him confidence as he stays here to go ahead and send his servants to his brother and ask for there to be a reconciliation. I think this gives him the confidence he needs because he doesn't really want to do this. He stayed away 20 years to avoid this. Now he has no choice, it seems. Where else is he going to go? But he's going to stay in this camp because there's angels here. This is where I want to be, because the world may be against me. There's this uncle hates me, and my brother, he doesn't like me, and I've made mistakes by choices I've made, but God's for me because God shows up. So I'm going to stay here because God likes me. That'd give you confidence to stay. The problem is, Jacob's staying here waiting on the report, and the report comes back and says, your brother's mad, it seems, because he's bringing 400 of his men with him. And I imagine at that point is when he got all nervous and broke down and started wrestling with, and it's like calling out to God. He starts praying to God like crazy, and we don't have many prayers recorded by Jacob, but he's praying big time right here. At the same time, he starts making his plan. He divides up his family and sends some off this way. He's making an escape plan. God, I need you, but in case you don't show up, I don't really understand how you can send me angels as a sign to say you're with me, and then 400 men are coming after me. This does not make sense. God, I thought you were with me. He's wrestling with the whole idea of whether he is going to actually trust God or not. That's his wrestling match. Is he for me? Is he against me? Will I trust him? Can I? I don't know. Have you ever been there? You ever been in that place where you know that God has done some amazing things for you? You've seen work in your life and you're so excited about and you have the confidence of, and then something rocks your world. And it seems like those events start showing up and they start chipping away at us, don't they? There's things that just start hitting us from all angles that say, look, you can't keep trusting God, because if he was really here for you, if he was for you, this wouldn't happen to you. And circumstance have a way of eroding that faith, and sometimes the seeds of doubt start to be planted and they start to grow in us. You ever have a crisis of faith? I know he's good. I know he has, but I don't know if he can this time. It's crazy that we do that when we've seen evidence of it. You realize that God just told Laban, you do not touch my servant Jacob. Uncle Laban wanted to kill him. God said, don't touch him. And Laban actually tells Jacob that he had a vision or a visit from God that told him not to touch his life. And so Jacob should feel really, really confident. And there's times in your life where you should feel really, really confident, because God has shown up and God has done amazing work and God has been faithful in your life and has moved in your life. And yet the first sign of trouble or the little chip, or it happens because it's a financial loss, or it's a promise, or it's a health concern, or it's something that you did again that you just struggled to not do. It's whatever it is, it starts chipping away at your faith and you don't believe that God can pull you through this time. I think that's what Jacob's wrestling with. Am I going to trust him or not? Or am I going to just do what I've always done and walk in my own strength and my own power and do it my way? Now there's a point at which Jacob comes to realize, of course, this isn't a battle with himself. It's not a vision in his head. It's a real person there. And I think that probably he thought it was an angel he was wrestling with. That's what I imagine when I read it, that he started off believing it was one of those angels he's wrestling with. So it doesn't completely surprise him that he's not alone. And it's crazy to think about wrestling with an angel, isn't it? And yet there's a point at which it flips in his mind and he realizes this is no angel. It's possible it's when he was touched, because who touches you and wrenches your hip? Who does that? Who has the power to do that? And yet is merciful enough to not take your life. And I think at some point he had to realize this was God. It's possible it's in the next thing that happens he realizes it as well, because what happens next is the man, whoever this man is, we know it's God, said, let me go, for it is daybreak. The sun's coming up. Why is that significant? Why would that be significant? Well, if this truly is God, then Jacob has been wrestling face to face with God Almighty. Now, it's a manifestation of God. It's a theophany, as they say. It's an appearance of God. And yet still, there's this fear that everyone has, this reverent fear of not being able to see God face to face and live. And so it's possible that Jacob realizes by that statement, let me go, for it's almost daybreak, that he will die in just a matter of moments. The sun is about to break. And yet Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Which means Jacob is willing to die to have this blessing. Every other blessing didn't matter to him. His father's blessing, the blessing of Jabin giving daughter in marriage, didn't matter. Nothing mattered that he wrestled for in this moment. The only thing that mattered was, is God going to bless me? Because either you bless me or you kill me. Those are the only two options. And I'm not letting go until one of those happens. I think Jacob is grasping the situation as he literally grasps onto God. He lays it all on the line. The man asked him, "What is your name?" Odd question, isn't it? 20 years ago, Jacob dressed up in his brother's clothes and stepped into his father's bedroom. And his father asked him the same question. "Who is this? What is your name?" And he says, "I am Esau, your firstborn." He lied to his daddy to steal the blessing, but he now cannot lie to God. And God wants him to confess not just what his name is, but who he is. So this time he answers, "Jacob." You know, the heel grabber, the deceiver, the relentless wrestler. It's Jacob. That's who I am. And the confession was enough. He said to him, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel. Because you have struggled with God and with men, have overcome." Wait. Didn't he lose? Didn't he get wrenched? Isn't he holding on only for the blessing? He's about to die or receive a blessing. He cannot win. And yet, God says, "You've won by surrendering all." This is the biggest and this is the final wrestling match of your life. It's the only one that really matters. Are you going to trust me with your life? And Jacob put it in his hands. And God said, "Okay, you've overcome, you've won, you've done it. You'll receive your blessing." The name Israel actually means blessed of God, which is really kind of cool when you dig deeper into that word blessed, because blessed means not only that good things are coming your way, we know that, right? When you're blessed, man, I've had a good day, I've been blessed. We say it all the time. But to be blessed of God means that you've placed yourself under the authority of God, to be under the blessor. And Jacob is placing his life finally under the blessor instead of relying on his own strength, his own ingenuity to try to get things done, to overcome. He is now finally changed from heel grabber to blessed of God. He will fight no more. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Jacob already knows the answer. Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." And by face to face, of course, he wrestled with him face to face all night. It's possible the sun was coming up and God still let him live. We don't know the exact moment, but what we do know is that his life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. So, an encounter with God changes you. It changed Jacob. Jacob's name was forever changed. Jacob's future was changed. He now would inherit the land of his father, which would become the land of Israel, named after himself. And his body was changed. And you might not think that last one is a blessing. I mean, none of us think it's a blessing when something bad happens to us, right? And yet, think about this. Jacob was praying so earnestly to God and at the same time making his own plans for his own escape. He's praying, "God, you've got to help me. How can you show me angels and not show up here? You have got to." And so he wants so badly for God to bless him, and God blesses him by touching him and preventing him from being what he has always been, one who can wrestle. He can't wrestle anymore. One who could run away if that's the right answer to his problem in that moment. He can't run anymore. And he must face his brother. His brother's coming. 400 men strong, he's coming. Jacob can't run. God has prevented his escape. And he says in that one act of touching his hip, now I have blessed you because you can't run. You have to trust me now. To be under the blessing of God is to completely trust him. You cannot receive blessings if you continually fight against him. And you have to ask yourself, is there something in my past in which God has touched me and wrenched me so that all of that confidence I have has been stripped away and I've been humbled? Now, I know there are circumstances in life that happen. Life happens. Sometimes it's very painful, but what if there are times where God has actually touched your life and has crippled you and you're thinking, no, that's my strength, and he has taken it away? What if your strength was your weakness? What if that part of your personality was your weakness? What if that was holding you back? What if what God is doing is blessing you by taking away what you thought was your most prized possession? With this, I can go far. And God says, yeah, far down the road, but way far away from me. And he takes it away because you earnestly called out to be under his blessing. To be under his blessing is to be surrendered to him. To trust him. Maybe what we ought to be praying is, instead of what we want and how we want to get it and making our own plans, God, bless me. And touch that area that I'm most prideful and most self-sufficient in. Now that's a hard prayer. I've asked Jo Cox if she would come up and give her wrestling story. And I want her to do it for our sake. I want us to believe, to realize, to grasp that God is a trustworthy God, that surrendering is the path to blessing. Jo.
I was going to start out this morning by talking about our Cox Corner, as some of them refer to over there. We have two. Normally, we're a little stronger in numbers. Some are serving. We have some sickness in our family. But when you look at the Cox Corner on any given Sunday, I think that a lot of people from the outside looking in would never know the struggles that our family has faced. Some probably think it's always been an easy road for us. I mean, we are certainly blessed. Our kids are all here. Our grandkids are all worshiping in the same building, and that means everything to us. I think it's important for us all to realize, though, that we don't know people's struggles. There's a song out now that I love by King and Country, that God only knows. God only knows what you've been through. God only knows what they say about you. And we have to remember that as we deal with people on a regular basis. We don't know what their struggle is. It was my mission in the past to keep my struggle hidden. I was totally unprepared in life for what happened. I planned a dreamy life for myself. You know, I planned a life with a happy marriage, you know, some kids, a home, you know, that little white picket fence that people always talk about. I said I had faith, and I've been a believer for a very long time, and I grew up in a very strong Christian home, and I'd seen that faith lived out by my parents. But my faith had not been tested. And so when Matt, my husband, for those of you that don't know us, became dependent on prescription drugs, I really had no idea how to handle it. I was completely unequipped. And so what I did was I hid it from everyone. I hid it from my family, who didn't live in the same state with me, so I didn't have to communicate regularly with them. I hid it from my church family. I hid it from friends. I hid it from coworkers. I really hid it from everyone. I didn't ask for any help. I didn't open up to anyone because I just tried to handle everything on my own. All the while, inside of me, I grew very angry and very resentful. I was angry that God had allowed this to happen to us. I was angry that Matt just couldn't stop taking drugs. And I was really resentful because I did not get the dreamy life that I had planned for myself. Now, there's a saying out in the world, and I'm here to tell you it's not biblical, that God will never give you more than you can handle. And I'm going to read a scripture to back that up. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, 8 and 9, Paul talks about this when he says, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we've experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God, who raises the dead. And I can tell you in my life, I was given more than I could bear. There's no doubt about that. But I was trying to do everything on my own. I was in despair because I did not have the strength to handle it. And I was not letting anyone in because I was way too prideful for that. And I wanted to be in control of my situation. I was not trusting God through this battle. All I wanted was for him to fix it. Just fix it. Take care of it. In May of 2007, Matt's struggle became very public. It was then that I could no longer hide what was happening in our home, in our family. In a strange kind of way, this brought about freedom for all of us. I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to go around pretending that this was not happening. My kids didn't have to pretend any longer. But I can tell you that it wasn't until that time that I realized there was a whole other battle that was taking place, and it was in me. I needed to submit myself and all the despair that I was feeling to the only one who had the power to heal and restore me. You see, until this time, I just wanted Matt to change. And quite honestly, I didn't think there was anything about me that needed to change. I didn't think I had any problems. I thought my battle was against drug addiction, which I hated and hate into this day. I thought my battle was against my marriage, and honestly, I thought it was against Matt himself. What I didn't realize is that it came down to me and my relationship with God, and did I trust him? This was only the beginning of the healing process for me. It definitely was not the end. And while I would never wish this type of situation on anyone that I know or anyone that I don't know, I know that what I experienced definitely changed me. And I want to share with you some lessons that I learned. I learned that God is faithful, no matter what. It does not matter the pain that you're feeling today. It doesn't matter what you are going through today or what you're going to face tomorrow. God is faithful. He can't be anything less than faithful. I learned that I can only change me and how I deal with things. I learned that God cannot use me or even help me if I cannot submit to him. And I learned that I am powerless over drug addiction, over another person. I don't have those powers. I don't have those in my life. But I also learned this. I learned that God can restore all things. I believe and know that mass recovery is a miracle. There's not many that have a story like ours to tell. You probably know some. I learned that restoration in our marriage is possible. God restored our marriage. We certainly couldn't have done that on our own. God healed our family, any wounds. Our family is thriving. Our kids are amazing. And as some have said to me, or maybe even like to think, that I was the strong one, that I was the one that kept us together. Guys, I don't have that kind of power. I don't now, and I didn't then. There is no way that we are together except through the restoring power of God. I also want you to know that I have not mastered submission. It's a daily choice. As a matter of fact, even this morning, Satan was trying to convince me that I was not worthy to stand here. I had a silly little battle going on over the weekend in my mind, something that's not a kingdom issue. But I walked in this morning and I told my team, I'm really struggling. I'm supposed to talk about trust right now, and I don't feel like I'm trusting very well. I would not have done that in the past. And so they, right here on the stage, just laid their hands on me. And they prayed over me. Because I was vulnerable and I let them in. That's not something I would have done in my past. There are still times in my life when anger and resentment rear its ugly head. But I'm learning to genuinely place that with God and let him deal with me in that. I am better, but I'm still a work in progress. So everything ultimately in our life comes down to trust, submission, us, and God. Whatever you're facing today is really what it comes down to. There are going to be times in this life that are just wrong. There's going to be times in this life that are painful for all of us. What we do with it and how we deal with our relationship with God is what matters. So for those of you that might be in a painful season right now, whatever those circumstances are, for those of you that might be hurt by somebody right now, I just want to ask you to not look further than yourself. I always looked beyond me. I always blamed beyond me. I never looked within for many years to see what I could do to help with the situation and how I could deal with it. Blaming is really, really easy. Trusting and giving up control is really hard. So I want to just take a second and talk. It's timely because we're getting ready to start, ladies, a Bible study, a 6-week study called The Quest with Beth Moore, and the title line is An Exertion Toward Intimacy with God. Bible studies have helped me to be vulnerable in my life. Bible studies are a safe place for me to share my story, for me to share my struggle. You might be thinking, I don't have time. I've got kids. I have a job. I have responsibilities. You owe it to yourself. 6 weeks, 6 nights, 6 days to get more intimate with God. And I can tell you, you will never do a Bible study and not come away changed. So in my story, I want to encourage you to find that safe place to look at yourself, to look at what you can do personally, not what God can fix for you, but what can you do in your life.
Thank you, Joe. Each week, I give you an I'm statement. This is something you can write in your bulletins. It's something that I encourage you to write in your booklet in the space that is provided in light green, teal, whatever that color is. It would go on the second page right at the top for this week's reading. The I am statement is simply this week. I'm blessed. I'm blessed. Look at that and reflect on that and think about that often, because I'm blessed means that God is working in your life. Now, maybe in the past there's been something that you've gone through that you're not sure how God has been at work. You certainly didn't see it in the moment, but maybe on reflection, you can see that He has actually touched you in a way, maybe has broken down a barrier in a way, has taken away what was a strength so that you could fully rely on Him and not on yourself any longer. So what you thought at the time was actually bad luck or was God failing you in that moment, it was a sad situation, turns out God's actually working there. I'm blessed also means that you've placed yourself under the blessor, that you've submitted to Him, that you've allowed Him to touch the areas of your life that need to be broken down and opened up and prepared, because you can't receive blessing if you're relying on your own strength. And so maybe some this morning need to do just that. Submit yourself to God. To come back under the blessings of God, the blesser. Now, please don't misunderstand me. This isn't one of those, hey, if you do this, everything in your life goes great, because there's a real enemy, it's you, and there's another enemy, it's Satan, and there's life, and there's just problems out there. God is not promising you a smooth road. He's promising you a full life. And that has a lot of dips and turns in it, doesn't it? But it is the only life worth living. Jacob got to that place where he said, I want you. I'll die if you don't give it to me. That's where we need to be. So I want to give you an opportunity. If you've never submitted yourself to Christ, if you've never accepted what He did on the cross, dying in your place, I want you to come. I want you to do that today. But I also want you to consider, maybe there's other struggles in your life you need prayer for, or maybe you have just lived too much, too far outside of God's will, and you need to come back and rededicate your life. We want to give you that opportunity this morning to do just that. This is going to be your time of decision. So I'm going to ask that you stand. And I'm going to pray. The worship team is going to lead us in a song, and that is when you respond. Father God, I want to thank you for Joe's transparency this morning. I want to thank you for the courage that you gave her to speak the truth. Even though the enemy was trying to work against her, you overcame. And I want you to receive all the glory, and I ask that you continue to work upon each and every heart in here, that we would stop relying on our own strength and stop relying on our own smarts and ingenuity and connections and popularity and giftedness, and we would just submit that to you. And we would allow you to be the one who provides. You're the blesser. We're the blessed. Help us to be in that right relationship with you again. Father, for those that need to make a decision, give them courage to step out right now. We ask for this in Jesus' name. Amen.